What's going down, people? It's your boy Meyer Crawl back again with another episode. We're here for the Dad's Podcast. Today we got my guy Christian. We've gotten a chance to sit down and talk about some very interesting topics. And one topic that is very, very important. Before we get into it, first I want him to get a chance to introduce himself to the audience. How y'all doing? How you doing, man?
Hey, you're doing well. Thanks. I appreciate the time and for setting this up. As I said, my name's Christian Posh, and I'm here in Northern Virginia. I've been here since 2006, and so this longest I've lived in one space, right? Prior military, got out, moved out here, and married and two boys. Older son from a previous relationship, and then my wife and I have a 7-year-old. So life is good, But I know part of the reason that you and I connected is my experience with a child custody process and kind of what came out of that, and I know you're military yourself, and so I understand this desire to want to make things better, right? If you come across something that's not right, you have this drive that says, okay, no, there is a better way to do that, whatever that is, right? So
absolutely. Like you get addicted to seeing everything in black and white when you're in the military. Like there's an instruction for everything, but the one thing you can't get stuck on is saying things like that's how it's always been. So you see an instruction, you know something's wrong with it. Something's wrong with the policy. Something's wrong with the SOP. You got to change it.
Right.
And that's the conversations that we've been having, is figuring out what is it that's been going on. Is it in black and white, or is this something that's just naturally just happening because of either the course of our society, or is it actually something that we can go and change? So talk to me, what have you been doing, your specific work in shared parenting?
Yeah, sure. So, when I got out of the military in 2006 and moved to the DC area, it was a clean slate for me professionally, right? I kind of had the chance to start over that way. And shortly after I moved here, I was dating someone at the time, and very long story short, found out I was going to be a dad. And unfortunately, shortly after that, the relationship ended, and then I knew I was going to be a single dad. And so, you always, in the moment, I certainly had wished for things to be different. But you know that we can't always control those things at the moment, right? So that happened, and I realized I was going to be a single dad, and so I knew I had to figure things out pretty quickly, right? I literally had an application in for the Peace Corps before I found that out, and I okay, that's not going to happen, right? So I pulled that back. I was training for a triathlon, and all life changed, right? And that's a good thing, right? It was a good thing, and while I was worried about being a single dad, right? It's never, I was 26. I was barely 27 by the time my son was born. And so, I didn't know if I was going to...
What scared you the most? What were you more worried about bringing in a new life, or not being in a relationship, or doing it possibly by yourself, or what worried you the most?
I'm half German, so I'm pretty pragmatic. I'm half German, half American. And so, not that Americans aren't pragmatic, but stereotypically Germans are very
yes.
This is how it is, and this is how we're going to proceed. And so, emotionally, right at the time, it was hard. I didn't necessarily want that, but I knew it was hard to admit, but I knew it was the right thing, right, in the end, for things to be the way they were. And so I think I was worried about all the standard things I think that fathers and parents generally are worried about, right? Do I know? Oh my gosh, where do I get diapers? What kind of diapers are there? And you start researching that. There's 47 kinds of diapers and
47?
brands, or whatever. I'm being extreme.
I thought there was a real stat. I was like, there's 47 different types of diapers. Almost. What in the world?
Yeah.
More, honestly.
Yeah, there's definitely more than 4 or 5, right? And so, worried about that, and bottles, and formula or not, and breastfeeding, and obviously I can't do one of those, right? So, worried about the standard things, and specifically for me, I was worried about employment, right? I had just gotten out of the Air Force. I had a temporary 6-month reserve officer tour set up, but beyond that, I had nothing else. So first and foremost was a job. And once I got that locked in, I said, okay, I've got income, I've got the stability there. I can start looking at other parenting type stuff, right? And unfortunately, I mistakenly assumed that going through the custody process would be pretty objective and almost checklist like, right? That there'd be, hey, look, we would look at objective things like, are the parents safe?
Right.
Are the parents criminals? Are they convicted felons? Do they have a drug or alcohol problem? Those types of things, right? And none of those things were an issue for me or frankly for my ex. So I thought it was just going to be a pretty straightforward process.
What you would expect, at least.
Yeah, 100%, right? Not having gone through that process before, and at 26, I didn't know anyone else that had gone through it, and so I assumed that, and I assumed to be like Law and Order, right? What we see on TV, there'd be right to an attorney, right to a speedy trial, and rules of evidence, and all this stuff, and none of that. The truth is, none of that applies in family law, right? There's criminal court and family court, and criminal court is kind of what you see. I mean, not what you see on TV really, but what you see on TV is the criminal court stuff. And family court is drastically different. It's fundamentally different, right? There's not a right to an attorney. There's not a right to a speedy trial. None of that is there. So if you can't afford an attorney, one doesn't get assigned to you. You just kind of go it on your own. And so some people get lucky, right? If they have a friend of a friend, or if they have a family member that's an attorney, right, that can kind of represent them a little bit. Maybe at a discounted rate, but a lot of people are not in that situation, and I certainly was not. I did learn very quickly that I was one of the lucky ones, right? That I had a steady income. I was a federal employee, right? So I was not making millions.
Yeah, some time at least, though.
Yeah, I had some time. I didn't have any college debt, and actually I went to college, right? I graduated. I had a degree. I had a master's degree. I had supportive parents, all that, supportive boss, right, who gave me the flexibility to do what I needed to do in the legal arena. So I was very lucky in all those ways. But even so, it almost wasn't enough, right? I maxed out multiple credit cards. I emptied my savings. I emptied my investments. I, borrowed money from my parent. All that stuff was there, and it frankly nearly bankrupted me, right? And I looked back at that and I thought, man, I was one of the lucky ones that I had all those resources there, and I barely made it. And when I say made it, I was just able to maintain contact with my son. That was just to maintain kind of the bare minimum, right? What we've come to know is the every other weekend kind of dynamic to begin with. I was able to appeal that decision, and ultimately I was able to get time with my son to be almost half of every year, right? 1 year it ended up being half the year. The other years was maybe 35, 40% of the year. Until he was age 5 when he started going to kindergarten, right? And entered that school year cycle. So
breaks and vacation and things of that nature, and holidays always get kind of harder or weird. Also based on location and where you live, I know that part plays a big part.
Yeah, it does. It does. And so I, again, while I was thrilled to have that time with him and I was thrilled to have it work out the way it did, that doesn't mean it wasn't stressful and it wasn't exhausting and draining emotionally, financially, everythingly, right?
Yeah.
But again, I learned that family law and family courts by and large were then and still are, they're getting better, but they still are stuck in this 1950s mentality of dated stereotypes, not just on gender, but race and religion. It's very, very, very old fashioned. And so I learned two things. One, that those assumptions hurt both women and men, moms and dads, and children. And that those systems and those processes and laws are in place based on almost 50 years old data and research and information. And it assumes that women and moms just are better at taking care of kids, and that they don't really want a career, right? They don't really need a career because they just want to be home and cook, clean, and have babies. obviously, which is not true or accurate, right?
Right. I promise I won't clip that part out without saying the other part on there. So you're good.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, but that's not helpful or true, right? And for dads, they assume that you and I just Friday nights we just want to smoke cigars and drink scotch in mahogany lined rooms filled with books and have it like almost be like an Anchorman type thing.
Yeah, that actually sounds really good. So, but yeah, that's
Right,
not all we want. You know what I mean? That's
right,
not it.
right. And to your point, right? You could, a dad could like those things, but also be a fully involved dad, and a mom could like to cook and bake, right?
Absolutely.
But she also can have and should be able to have a career. And so, is it a constant give and take? Of course, right? It's a balance where that working parents face all the time, but they do it. And to me, the hypocritical irony in the U.S. at least is that as long as people are married to each other and both parents are working and raising their kids, there's no question about that, right? There's no one gets involved legally. No courts get involved and say, well, how are you doing that? How are you dividing your time? Who's doing what? But as soon as parents get divorced, now we have to go through the courts and we have to get judges involved, and there has to be a discussion of who's doing what and how much parenting is one parent doing, right? How much time is one parent?
You're almost getting punished, basically, by the courts and by law. You're getting punished for not being able to figure that out, and it's barreling down on everybody, like the children,
Right.
and both parties too.
Right. And they force you almost into this generally. Again, there are exceptions, but for the most part, they force parents into these 1950s stereotypes, right? They say, no. My own experience was that, the guardian assigned to our case initially said, hey, I would recommend a 50-50 arrangement. The judge literally laughed at her, at the guardian, and said, no, I've never done that. I'm not about to start doing that. And he ordered every other weekend, right? And that's where I referenced earlier. I appealed that and was able to get, almost half every year with my son. But if I hadn't had the resources to do that, I would have been stuck, right, with that. And that's just how it would have been.
That is scary. I'm not gonna lie.
Right.
That's scary to go go in front of somebody where you're assuming everything is supposed to be fair. Like, we're talking about a court of law. Everything's supposed to be fair, and that they're going to look into as much as they possibly can to try to figure out what would look best for the child, at least for the child, right? You would hope that it'd be for every party involved, but at least for the child. And to know that you can step into the court and the first thing that's not even thought of is 50-50. Because I would think that would be the standard, or at least where you start. But that's not average, at least what I'm hearing.
That's exactly right. And that's the whole premise. One of the premises behind shared parenting, right, is that let's start on an equal footing. Let's assume both parents are competent, willing, and able individuals. And then we have a conversation with a judge. When we don't always have to do that, right? There's plenty of cases that settle outside of court. But if a case goes in front of a judge, that we have conversations or we ask questions that are very objective, right? Has either parent been convicted of a crime? Has either parent had a problem with drugs or alcohol abuse, right? Is abuse a factor in the relationship, right? Whether it's between the parents or involving the children. Of course, hopefully that's not a case. That's not the case at all. But no, that's not what happens, right? And you still have a lot of old school judges and some attorneys, many attorneys that are out there that don't believe that and don't think that way. I'll tell you, a couple of years ago here in Virginia, we had a state lawmaker who is still there in Richmond, and this gentleman is older, and literally said out loud, like, "No, my mom raised me on my own, and I turned out great, so therefore I think that's a good system." Well, right, but his particular family is very well off, right, financially, and has a lot of old money, and so yeah, you turned out fine because your family had a lot of money, and it was fine. But the majority of kids and families that get stuck in the system are lower income minority families who don't have the financial resources or the family support necessarily to see this through. And that's what I kept coming back to in my own experience, right? Saying that I was lucky that I was able to get through that. But what about the majority of folks that can't even enter the arena, right? Let alone somewhat succeed. And so, and to be honest with you, states don't really know how big that number is, right? They can't tell you how many kids and families are affected by this negatively because they never enter the system to begin with. They never enter the courts to begin with. So,
Oh yeah. I would assume that a lot of people get scared to even go, to be honest. They don't have the money to go, or they beg to not go, and they just give whatever party, they try to figure it out, but they don't even know where to start half the time, to be honest. I know a lot of
right.
people know where to start. They just get too afraid because they know socially what happens and they have an idea of what they've seen before. They just rather not even do it. And it's sad.
Right. Or they've heard whispers, right, from friends or neighbors or whatever that said, "Oh man, if you get in there, here's how it's going to go." And to be candid, right, a lot of dads and men here like, "Hey, if you're a dad, you're going to lose," right?
Yeah.
And by and large, that can be very true, right? I want to emphasize that is less and less true. But we're still not anywhere near where we need to be, right? I think whereas before...
What do you think has made it less and less true?
Yeah. I definitely, if I can, I'll get right to that. I want to say I don't want to imply that, oh, we're so close to being great. We're not. We have a long way to go. But whereas before, let's say 96% of cases were ending negatively for children and families, we might be like at 75% of cases, right? 80% of cases are now negatively, have a negative result for kids and families. So we're getting better, but it's still not great. What is driving that? What is making it better? What is making it more balanced? Is that what you're saying? So I think, and I'll also say I've spent the last, our chapter and I have spent the last 10 years sitting on Virginia's child support guideline review panel. So I've sat on that for 6 of those 10 years, and the other 4, a colleague of mine did. And I mentioned that because I think a lot of this is underpinned by money. And without getting into this side conversation about child support, states are incentivized to collect as much child support as possible from non-custodial parents, right? Parents that have, I don't like calling it visitation because you visit people in jail. You don't visit your kids.
Right? It sounds bad.
That have that don't have their kids the majority of the time, right? Those parents are paying child support. And I want to be clear, paying child support is a good and necessary thing, right? This is not about not paying child support. I will tell you that if you dig into the very boring part of the math behind child support, it is an inflated figure across the board and therefore unattainable for a lot of parents that have to pay that amount. But nevertheless, right, states are incentivized to collect as much child support as possible. And the way they maximize that amount is to order as disparate of a custody arrangement as possible, right? So the less time that one parent has with their child, the more they pay in child support to this parent here.
Oh, wow.
Right? So that's just the reality of it, right? In Virginia, I'll tell you, we have what's called a 90-day cliff. And if you have your child 90 days or less with you, your support is calculated by this formula here. If as soon as you hit 91 days, it's calculated by a separate formula. The difference between those two formulas will vary based on your income and your ex's income. But I will tell you, in my case, it changed it by 60 to 70%, right? But
really?
It decreased by that much, yeah. So that's why they call it the 90-day cliff. So yeah, there's a big incentive, right, to keep the orders of child support as high as possible. And again, the only way you do that, or the best way you do that, is to keep one of the parents lower than the other, right? And certainly in Virginia, below 90 days. Other states have different laws and different rules. And if for a long time, if a couple was married and got divorced, typically, historically, the male was making more money than the dad was making more money than the mom. Is that right? That's a separate conversation, right? About equal pay for equal work, and I get that, and I'm not saying I agree with that dynamic, but that's for a long time it was that way.
Right.
And so when that divorce happened, the system looked at it and said, "Oh, great, here's a bigger pot of money over here. That's where we need to go after. That's what we need to pursue because we can get more money from this person because their income is higher." So getting back to your question of how has that changed, right? As things like equal pay for equal work have justifiably gained momentum and gained foothold, right, societally across the board, that means income for women has gone up. And in some cases, when parents get divorced, sometimes the mom is making more money than the dad. And that's where you start to see the system saying, okay, well, now we're going to go after that pot of money, right? And you're seeing not a huge number, but an increasing number of moms now having to fight for custody. And it has nothing to do, I want to be clear, it has nothing to do in either, whether it's the mom or the dad making more money, has nothing to do with their ability to parent, right? It is purely financially driven. So, and neither case is fair. Neither case is best for the child. And that's where shared parenting comes in, right? And that's why I really like what National Parents Organization has done, is to bring women and men together in this space, to say that we can do more together than apart. And so in Virginia, our membership is modeled after that. The majority of our membership is actually women. I just happen to be the guy that, looked first and saw that we don't have a Virginia chapter. And I said, hey, I'll start one, right? Awesome. The majority of our members are women. And I also don't think it's any coincidence that the attorneys that we have advising us are all women. There's one guy, right? But mostly women. And then the psychologists we have advising us are all women. There's 3 of them that are actively involved with us, and they're all women. So I don't think that's a coincidence, right? That's the case and that's happening. And so, that's why we always say this system hurts women and men and children and society, and we need to do better, and we can, right? The good thing is we know what the answer is, right?
Yeah,
this shared parenting.
That we can. I think a lot of people don't think that we can. They don't know where to start and how. Like that there's organizations even talking about it, that there's people willing to make a difference when we're having these conversations. They don't even know where to start. But you're saying that we can, and how does that start though? Are these articles being written? Are we going to town hall? Like, how do you start to help this movement of rejuvenating? I don't even call it rejuvenating, but just changing and updating what our policies and laws look like, so that we're not sitting in 1956.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a little bit of everything, right? So one resource I would say is to go to the MPO's website, sharedparenting.org, and see if your state has an active chapter. And if they do, reach out to those chapters leaders and see if you can get involved and how you can get involved. And if they don't have a chapter in your state, consider starting one, right? And I will say the national headquarters is very good about supporting new chapters and getting them set up and going. And then I would also, whether you do that through National Parents Organization or not, I would encourage folks to establish a kind of a regular dialogue between shared parenting advocates, domestic violence prevention advocates, and really all parents, right? To communicate with each other, and then jointly with local representatives, right? Whether that's at the school board, or your city council, or your state level representatives, right? And you can find out who those are pretty easily. Every state has a website where you can put in your address and find out who your state level reps are. And those folks are surprisingly available, right? And accessible, because that's all they do, right? They are in your district. I'll tell you, I've met my delegate over the last 10 years multiple times. There's a Panera on the street that he likes to eat at. And
Panera's always a great spot. Good go to. I'm a white
endorsement
mac and cheese guy, so.
That's right. I was gonna say, it's not an endorsement of Panera, but that's just where he happens to want to meet. And so I would encourage that, and I would also make this as open as possible, whatever engagement you do, for moms and dads, and with an emphasis on dads, right? So look for opportunities to do that. So our schools are a good example of that, right? Um, my wife volunteers her time with the PTA, but whenever there's an opportunity for me to also participate, I will go do that. And it was interesting to me when we registered our son, right? They not only limited they had a contact, right, for the child, like the emergency contact, and there was only one space, and they literally labeled it contact info for the mother.
Dang.
And so I said, no, let's at least say parent, right?
Yeah.
But in some cases, it might be a grandparent, right? You don't know. But we actually got our school to change their form to have it list both, right?
Awesome.
And more, it might be two dads, it might be two moms, right? You don't know. And so finding opportunities for that, I think, really matters, right? Another opportunity was our local swim school now 6-7 years ago when we took our son for swimming classes, right? They typically call him mommy and me, right? And I went to them and I said, hey, can we have it be parent and me? And to their credit, they talked to me about it and they changed it, and it's now parent and me, right? So that stuff matters, right? And again, look for those opportunities, right? They're all over the place. We may not always see them, right? There was this organization, unfortunately, kind of was a victim to COVID, and then they've stopped gathering. But there was an annual summit called Dad 2.0, and they really got into the advertising space and tried to and I think they have succeeded at that, to change the narrative in commercials, right? Where you kind of see, typically you've seen, the Peter Griffin, Homer Simpson, Al Bundy stereotype of the dad doesn't know what he's doing and mom comes in to rescue him. And there was a commercial, a Clorox commercial years ago that showed that kind of dynamic, right? The dad didn't know what to do. It was kind of an idiot. It was spaghetti night, and dad was like, oh, everything's a mess. I don't know what to do. And mom showed up with the wipes and cleaned everything up.
Oh, actually, I think I might remember that exact commercial, but keep going. I think I do remember that one.
Yeah, no. So a friend of mine actually named Josh Leves, and I'll plug his book here because it's a great book. It's called All In, and he makes the case for paid leave, actually, but he actually has a chapter on shared parenting in his book. He actually engaged Clorox, and he said, hey, why are you stop it? Right? It's like, let's change the commercial a little bit. And then they did. And he said, look, the point is you want to show your product can clean up any mess. I get it, but you can have the dad do that, right? You don't have to have the mom come in and rescue him, so to speak. Absolutely. And now, if you fast forward to now, you see things that used to be mom specific, right? So Kix cereal used to be kid love or whatever, mom approved, right? Now it says, if you look at the boxes, it says parent approved. Choosy moms choose Jif is no longer a thing, right? Robitussin used to have Dr. Mom. That's no longer a thing, right? So to get away from this notion of, one, that it's mom's job to do that, right? Dads don't really want to deal with a sick kid. They don't really do breakfast with their kids. They don't really make lunches for their kids. To get away from that assumption, and that it always has to be the mom doing it, right? That it's a one gender thing. So now you look at commercials, right? There's dads with baby Bjorns and high-fiving each other with bottles in their hand, baby bottles in their hand, right? And I think that's good.
More like reality, because these are things that dads want to do, also do, and it's not building an assumption for our kids as well, because they're watching the TV sitting right next to us, and they're like, well, my dad's actually the cook in the house. Like he does all the cooking, but they think it's an anomaly, but not, that's not the reality.
Right.
It's helpful that people are actually starting to take a little bit more of those opportunities to make some changes. But I think sometimes when we just naturally don't catch it. It's just, we're used to seeing it that way. And naturally we don't make the change until somebody just comes up to you and say, hey, why are we doing it like this? Like,
right.
I don't know.
It's a good question.
Right? It's a good question.
Well, and what's interesting about these companies like Clorox, Kia, Toyota, Cheerios, all these brands, Tide was another one. They saw not only the hypocrisy and the dated nature of those commercials, but not to make this about money, but they saw there's a whole untapped market out there, right? We could almost double our income, right? Our revenue if we tap this other market.
That's so
And
true.
so, not saying that that's why they changed, but they certain from a business perspective, they realized, oh,
What we do know, we do know they naturally probably wouldn't change if it wasn't beneficial financially. There's not a
100%.
lot of companies that will go out there and do that. It's normally maybe family-owned companies or people who were really rooted in care about the culture of their company that might do that. But it still has to financially make sense, especially if we're talking about a lot of these big blue chip companies. And that it just saddens me that the idea hasn't changed with time. Like I was reading something yesterday, and I think it says something like back in 1987, they did a survey and they asked like how many fathers had just changed the diaper, and it was like 46% of fathers like had never changed the diaper, and that could be for a whole different lot of reasons. But then they did that same survey this year, and it's down to 3%. So it's like, why is nothing else around us changing?
Right.
And
Right.
we gotta make some changes. I want to go into a little bit more of like the children and their emotional, like how this relationship or what the laws are doing is affecting them, as well as affecting mothers and fathers emotionally. Did you and your children basically talk to me about the relationship between you and your children during that time? Did it affect it at all? Did it increase, decrease? Did you just see it being affected during the time in which you were fighting for more time?
Yeah, so I think the divorce, or like in my case, I was never married to my ex, but there was a separation still, right? There was a splitting up of that dynamic, and yes, it's a little bit different. My son never knew, my older son never knew his mom and I together, right? He only knew us as a part. But there was still stress. There was still, sure, there were disagreements. There were arguments, right? Kids are very perceptive, right? They pick up on that all the time. What the research has found, and I've seen this to be true in our case, right, is that divorce or separation is stressful and is hard and bad enough as it is, right? It's challenging enough as it is.
Yeah.
Why make that any more difficult, right? By making the child custody determination any more laborious and difficult than it needs to be. One of the things that the research has found is that as long as children in that dynamic have a strong relationship with both of their parents, then that acts as a barrier and as a protection mechanism for the stress that comes with that, right? So, and inversely, if they don't have as much time as possible with one or both parents, or the other parent, then that is more challenging for them, and they suffer more from the things you hear about, the anxiety and the negative behaviors, right? Self behaviors that you see, and I'm keeping that general because it differs a little bit between those behaviors differs between boys and girls. They're expressed differently, right? Girls typically engage in more self-harm. Boys generally engage in more outward aggression and violence, right? Neither of those are helpful, right? Or productive, obviously. So you want to avoid them as much as possible, and you want to mitigate them as much as possible. So shared parenting does that, right? It's a different dynamic, and it always is going to take some getting used to. But the point is, we've seen 50 plus studies now show that is what's best for kids. And we know that what's best for kids is best for society, right? And the unfortunate part is that the United States is actually the only developed country in the world that has not implemented shared parenting across the board, right? So it'd be great if that happened on a national level. But we've taken the approach of changing it state by state and having that hopefully build into something bigger, right? So we're seeing growing number of states. Starting in 2018, we saw changes really start to happen in Kentucky and then Arkansas, and District of Columbia has a pretty strong statute for this as well. And so we're seeing more and more states, not just red states, but it's red and blue states, right, that are recognizing the research behind it. And that it doesn't have to be this zero-sum game, right? It's not well, you can have shared parenting, but then you're putting people at risk of domestic violence. No, that's you can actually structure shared parenting laws to still protect victims of abuse when they need to be protected. It's not hard to do
gotta
that.
work
Right?
harder. That's the thing, is you can't be lazy. Like,
That's right.
you want to
That's right.
make this policy, and you want to put things on black and white, and you want to blanket it for everybody across the board, and it's not fair though, and it's lazy.
Right. And we're seeing that more and more. And I mentioned that some of our strongest advocates are women. There's actually a mom in Virginia. She used to be up in New York, but she's in Richmond now. Emma Johnson. She just published a book called The 50-50 Solution. And she talks about it, right? She talks about her own history, frankly, as a feminist and having believed certain things along the way. And then when she looked at the research and the data and her own experience with the courts, she said, okay, I get it. This is really what's best for kids. And so she's a strong advocate for this stuff as well. We in Virginia, our chapter tries to read the tea leaves as much as we can politically and what's possible. And so as a chapter in Virginia, we're not pushing for a 50-50 presumption. That's that's starting 50-50. But we do want to model after Arizona. Arizona's law, for example, just says, hey, you want to maximize the time for children as much as possible. And that might be 50-50, right, in a situation. Or it might be 60-40 or 70-30 or 65-35, right? The numbers don't matter. The point is to have as much time as possible with kids, with both of their parents. And psychologists will generally say that minimum amount of time to have it be statistically significant is around 30-35% with with each parent, right? And that's very achievable, right? Between the summer breaks and the holiday breaks and the spring breaks and whatever else, right? It's very, very possible to get to that. So we just have to want to be able to do that, right? And realize that that's what's best for kids.
Now, do you, in your experience, know if these conversations, as time goes on, are ever revisited? Like, as you create whatever you're supposed to go after, like if it's a 15, like you see your kids maybe once every 2 weeks, is it ever revisited, or is it only revisited when you appeal?
The only time it's revisited is if one or the other parent files for that to happen, right? It's not a regular thing. So, and that's fine, but it does require, again, more money, right? You got to hire an attorney and pay the retainer,
Okay.
and all that stuff happens again, right? And you may not, rarely do you ever get what you want, right? It's usually a somewhat of a splitting of desires from from both parties. And that's okay, right? That's part of what the legal process does. But it's also very expensive, right? Yeah. So figure $5,000 to $10,000 retainer up front. That usually gets burned away in 2 months, and you just keep throwing it in there, right? So yeah, it can be, and it should be revisited, right? The arrangement you have for like a 2-year-old is probably not what you should have for a 10-year-old,
right?
Or a 15-year-old, right? Now, once you get to 15, your kid's a 15-year-old, right?
Yeah.
They don't really want to hang out with you most of the time, right? So,
friends and stuff anyway. Like now there's summers and they got sports and stuff like that too. So yeah.
Right. My older son, this coming summer will be his last summer before he turns 18 here, and so yeah, we're being pretty flexible, right? As far as, okay, he's got Boy Scout summer camp, and he's got a band camp at the end of the summer, and then he, if we can, there's a high adventure camp with Boy Scouts that, if it works out, well, maybe we can do that too, right? But still going, there's a week long that we go on a family vacation for. He'll be there for that, and so yeah, you just now we just work it out with him, and then obviously his mom is part of that conversation. But you just adjust, right? Once they're 15, 16, 17, it's a different thought process. Yeah, so it does, and it should get revisited, but it does require a cost, right?
Yeah.
Even if you and your ex get along and you talk about it and you agree what you want to do, to get it entered into a court order, you still have to go in front of a judge, right?
What would you
And have
recommend
them.
to maybe two that don't necessarily get along, but also don't have the money to go back into court to like revisit the conversation? Like maybe things are getting a little bit more flexible. They're going from age 10 to maybe like 13, or maybe 3 to like age 10. What other resources could they use? There people to talk to? Should they
Mhm.
maybe seek therapy to get a mediator? What
Yeah.
things, either in your own personal experience, or would you recommend to
Yeah.
someone?
Yeah, outside of the legal process, which is I would not recommend, frankly, right? It's never going to end well for anyone. It will take a long time, at least 6 months, if not year and a half, 2 years, to get to a resolution on a certain topic.
Wow.
And the thing that I would recommend is alternative dispute resolution. It's just oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I was saying
Okay,
alternative
I lost you there
dispute.
for the. Yeah, alternative dispute resolution and mediation is a great option for folks, right? It does still cost money. It's not as much as an attorney, so it's more affordable in that way. And I think you'd have a better chance of getting to a more agreeable solution for both parties, right? And it would more closely mirror what you both had maybe talked about and agreed to, right, prior to that. Um, I would recommend if you are a parent looking at this, um, I would ask questions, right? If you already had an attorney before, um, hopefully when you have that attorney, so you don't have to pay them twice, you ask them where they stand on shared parenting, if they know of any mediators in the area that they would recommend, and importantly, that are respected by the judges, right? Because those relationships are really, really important, right? How well a mediator knows a judge or is respected by that judge, and the same thing for an attorney, how well that attorney knows that judge. Oftentimes, I've found matters more than almost anything else, right? It almost matters more than the facts. So, um, yeah, find out where your attorney stands on things like collaborative law or ADR, alternative dispute resolution. I
Okay.
think that'll tell you a lot about that attorney. And then asking questions, okay, are there 2 or 3 mediators that you would recommend, right? Who also agree with collaborative law and ADR and shared parenting, right?
Yeah.
And there's oftentimes a misunderstanding that shared parenting is this 50-50 mandate, that it has to be that and nothing else. And that's just not true, right? We know that shared parenting is a flexible arrangement that could be 50-50, but again, it could be 60-40, 70-30, 68-32. I'm doing that in public now, but
I'm an English major, so please do not.
yeah,
Is
yeah, no, it's
that's
just
the biggest misconception that you hear or see around shared parenting?
it's probably a close tie. That's certainly one of the big ones. The other one is that shared parenting puts victims of domestic abuse at continued risk. Right, that's the other big misunderstanding. And so, every responsible and good shared parenting law has a clear exception for domestic abuse, right? Which basically says, look, shared parenting is best for kids. We should have as much time as possible for kids with both their parents, except in cases where there's abuse. And I know you quickly get into, well, how do we define abuse? Do we include, is it just physical or sexual or emotional or drug or alcohol? And what about neglect? And what about stalking? And I get it, right? And each state defines those things differently. So I would just encourage you to look at how your state defines that. And again, have conversations with domestic violence prevention advocates. But the important thing to remember is that these two communities, right, shared parenting advocates and domestic violence prevention advocates, are really not at odds with each other, right? We have a lot of things in common. And in fact, that's why I was asked to join the board of a domestic violence prevention nonprofit, because of that, right? That reality. And to the founder's credit, she herself is a victim and survivor of domestic abuse. And she is also a strong advocate for shared parenting, right? So you see it more and more that folks are realizing these things are not at odds, but there are still some dated perceptions out there. So I think those would be the two biggest things, right? One, the domestic violence topic, and also the misconception that shared parenting is 50-50 and nothing else, right? It cannot be anything else. And if you think it's 50-50 and nothing else, sure, I would agree. That's not realistic.
Yeah, doesn't sound realistic. It's not at least what I've at least experienced in my own friends who've been in the situation either. And I love that we're even having this conversation here. And although, of course, this is a fatherhood podcast, I have many different type of people who listen to this.
Yeah.
And I automatically find myself in a position as soon as we first sat down and had our conversation, it was like, I don't need to be in the situation to advocate for shared parenting.
Yes.
I need people to also know and understand that too. It's even more helpful. We should all be helping each other out, get to that playing field. And maybe also when we get to the playing field and we're holding hands together, mothers, fathers, people who are in shared parenting relationships or not co-parenting at all, married, divorced, whatever it looks like, it would make more sense to the people on the other side, on the other sideline who are writing these policies and recognizing that we need these things to change and we all are standing together to get it done.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. That we should be doing that, and I would agree with you that it's often more helpful for, and you don't have to be a parent either, right? For
Yes.
people who are not in this system to engage and to support it, because it really, I mean, it just, if you don't care about children at all, you don't care about divorce stuff at all, you just want to live your life, right? At the very least, I would think you want the economy to be strong as it can be. And you want people to be as engaged economically as they can be, which means they're paying their taxes and all that other stuff, right? So with the current custody processes in place, we're almost forcing one of those parents out of the workforce, right? Because that parent has 80%-ish of the child care burden is on them. And so best case scenario, they're working part-time, right? And even if they're working full-time, they're not earning as much money as they normally could, right? If there was a more equitable child custody situation in place. So if you have shared parenting in place, that means it's best for children. It's best for both parents because both parents can now be fully employed in the workforce, right? If one parent was a stay-at-home parent for 10, 15 years, now they have the time to go back to school if they need to. They can go get training if they need to, certifications, whatever. And yes, personally, right? They can date, right? Both parents can go on a date again. They can afford to go get a cup of coffee. Right. It's just, it really benefits parents and kids across the board. And it's a big reason why I think, again, the rest of the developed world has gone on board with this. Yeah. And they did this a while ago, right? Yeah. It's not just they did it in the last year or two. Yeah, so you look at those countries, I don't think it's any coincidence, but I saw a survey just recently that talked about the happiest countries in the world. And the United States has been on that list, the top 10 of that list for forever, right? For years and years and years. Yeah. This year was the first year where we fell out of the top 10. And it was interesting to me that the top 5 countries, maybe the top 6 countries on that list, are all countries that have had shared parenting in place the longest time possible. Now, I'm not saying that shared parenting makes that country the happiest country in the world, right. But I think it speaks to the philosophy that country has with their citizens, right? To say, like, we're going to treat you equitably, we're going to treat you fairly, we're going to treat you if you're going through something stressful, we're going to make it as least stressful as possible, right? For your children, for you. And I think that kind of approach is replicated in other parts of their society, right? And that's what leads to them being the happiest countries in the world. So yeah, I wasn't surprised at all to see those countries on that list. So
I'm definitely with you. And yeah, I'm gonna take a look at that list too, because I now want to see, like, how far behind are we when it comes to adding and changing a lot of everything. Because I see we have been extremely behind. But I wanted to ask a question too. You kind of gave a few answers to it when you mentioned some more practical strategies or questions that parents may be going, may use in order to, when they're in the family courts or something like that. Sorry, I'm kind of fumbling over my words. I'm trying to
No, it's fine.
but I want more, if you can, maybe personal advice to a mother or a father who are in the family court going through this right now. What could you say to them?
I would say that, one, I would say your hurt and your pain is real, and it matters, right? That it's not fun and it's not easy. But I will say that it doesn't necessarily end, but it does change significantly, right? It does become very manageable. It does become a much, much smaller problem, right? The choice that you have to make for yourself and for yourself as co-parents together, right? Is how painful do you want to make it for yourself and for your child? If you don't care about your ex at all, okay, but
At least.
right? At least acknowledge that person as your child's parent. So knowing that your child is living with that person for a decent amount of time, whatever that is, right? If it's stressful for that parent, and that parent could be the best parent in the world, but the child is going to feel that. So feel that stress. So you have to ask yourself, how stressful do you want to make it? How painful do you want to make it? How long do you want to make this last? And know that, look, attorneys, there are some good attorneys out there that will be honest and will try to make it end as quickly as possible. But there are many attorneys out there who will draw it out and will tell you that, oh, well, you can get more time, you can make them pay more money, you can win this battle right over here about that vacation, and you can do this and you can do that, and you've got to make sure you don't let them do this. Yes, they will advise you to do all of that and to fight all of that out because you will pay them for it.
Yep.
You will pay them for every staple, every copy, literally every copy that's made.
Copy, really?
It's the line item on the legal bills that people get, right? How many copies are made? If they have to mail you something, you pay for that. You pay for their time. You pay for their travel, right? All of it. So know that whatever comes out of it at the end is probably not going to be really what you want, and it's probably not going to be what your ex wants, and your kid's going to be frustrated. The only thing, so you end up with an agreement that is kind of not really what you want, but you're also $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 poorer now to have an agreement that you don't really kind of like.
Right.
So if this is maybe pessimistic, but if you're going to end up with an agreement that you kind of sort of don't really like, but you're okay with, at the very least, maybe spend less money getting there, right? So go into mediation, go into using ADR, right? You may still, worst case, you may still end up with an agreement that you don't really like, but you spend a lot less money getting there and a lot less time getting there.
And that can lessen the brunt of the struggle afterwards as well, because it could be something that you don't really like, and now you may be possibly paying child support, and you took out loans to get a lawyer. So
right.
Worse now than it was before.
Right. No, 100%. And so many parents have to choose between paying child support and fighting to be in their kids' lives. And most parents are going to pay their child support. They're going to choose paying their child support, right? Because they want to, and they know they have to, and they know if they don't, they could end up in jail. But in choosing that, they're also choosing not fighting for their kid and just accepting whatever time they got, right? And now their child often is left wondering, well, why didn't mom or dad want to fight for me? Why didn't they want to spend time with me? They did. It was just financially impossible, right? And so that's why, a tagline we use in Virginia is that we do this because others can't and children need it. That's it, right? Others can't afford it. Children need it. And I feel strongly that we have a responsibility to do as much as we can to move the ball forward. So, yeah, we're making progress. In 2018, we passed a small law, a very, very small change in law that now makes it a requirement for judges to at least consider shared parenting on par with sole custody. But judges still are able to order whatever they want, and by and large, they still order kind of the every other weekend dynamic. So we're certainly pushing for more change, and we gain more momentum every year.
Yeah,
Um,
small step.
but
That's all it takes.
we'll get there.
You got to start somewhere. And I only have a few questions for you, but you mentioned financials and like
Yeah.
being financially responsible for maybe more now than you were. Let's say your resources were limited. Could you help me maybe find out how could you spend good quality time with your children, even when your resources are
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I'll when my older son was born, yes, I made decent money again as a federal employee, right? But I'd say 85 to 95% of my income went towards either, how do I say this? By the time when, the first couple of years of my son's life, before I was able to appeal and get a more balanced situation in place, by the time I paid my rent on my apartment, and it was a 1-bedroom apartment, I drove a Subaru Outback, so not a fancy car, right? By the time I paid my rent, my car payment, and my child support, I had about $300 left every month for everything else, right? That includes utilities, gas, groceries, insurance, and right, how much, groceries alone will eat that up, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So,
My son eats
um,
apples.
that's right. That's right. So it's I didn't have a lot of money is my point, for a good while there. And when my son was with me, one, that was a reality to consider, that I didn't have money to go do stuff necessarily. Right. And I also didn't want to be called, the Disneyland dad, like that. Oh, my kids with me, we're going to do all this fun stuff. We're going to do all, I didn't want that. Even if I had the resources to do it, I didn't want to do that. So I just focused on spending quality time with him, right? And it sounds simple, but it was almost like a lot of COVID activities, right? It was a lot of, when he was younger, coloring books and crosswords and conversations. And we still had fun movie nights, right? At the time we did DVDs, right? It was not streaming stuff, but we Friday nights we'd have movie night at the house. We'd go on walks, or now I'm lucky that I live in the DC area, right? And so we'd go into the Smithsonian, right?
Yeah, okay.
And I would take the metro in. So the metro was, $4 to go into the city, right?
Yeah.
So I could do that, take him into the Smithsonian. We'd pack a lunch, right? I'd pack peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And he called it the Dinosaur Museum, the Natural History Museum. That was one of his favorites, right?
I call it that.
So we would do that a lot, right? And I distinctly remember when he was a young kid and he wanted to do the merry-go-round with a carousel out there on the mall, and I couldn't afford it. I didn't tell him that's why we couldn't do it, but I just said, "Oh, buddy, maybe when you're older, right? Maybe when you're older." And so he has since ridden that carousel, right, several times, but early on, no, that just couldn't happen. And so finding stuff like that, right? Going to a farmer's market, not that you have to buy stuff at the farmer's market, but you're outside, you're with people, you're talking about, healthy eating and making good choices. And you can have financial conversations with him, like, hey, if you're going to buy this many pounds of this and it costs this, what does that cost? Oh, it's this. Yeah, great. Just those kinds of things, right? I think are really, really helpful. Cooking at home. I still don't consider myself a cook.
Okay.
I'm okay. But I figured it out, right? When he was with me, and he was with me for about 6 weeks at a time, several times throughout the year. So for those times, we can't go out to eat all the time, right? So, there was a lot of soup, there was a lot of chili, there was a lot of, and then sure, take him to the grocery store and
Let him look at
comparison shopping and like, hey, this and that, like, what's the store brand? What's this? What's that? Right. So that's what I would recommend, right? I think every community will have some events that you can go do for free or very little cost, that don't require travel.
Public library normally always has plenty of activities and events.
Yeah, that's right. 100%. And so, whether you live in DC or you live in Topeka or Seattle or somewhere in between, those kinds of resources exist, right? And if you live in a very remote area, um, chances are you live there and you're comfortable there. Hopefully you're comfortable there, right? Then you just do that, right? Maybe you go on a lot of hikes. You go camping, right? And if you don't have a tent, that's okay, right? There's ways to make cheap. I mean, I've done this, right? You string a rope and put a tarp over it, and you tie it down, and that's it. That's your tent, right? If you're okay with that, some people aren't okay with that. All right, that's fine. But there are ways to do that.
There's always going to be ways. And I got one last question before we kind of give people a way to find you or to find the organization as we get out of here. I was reading your questionnaire, and there was an organization, or at least a movement that I wasn't familiar with. It was called Squat for Change. Can you talk to me about that? What is that?
Yeah, that's a great example, I think, of a seemingly niche topic, but it has much broader implications. And so, this guy I know, Dante Palmer, is the gentleman's name, and he's a married dad, and he came across a challenge, I think that a lot of dads have come across, right? When you're out with your kids somewhere, let's say you're in a restaurant, and then your child that's in diapers has to have their diaper changed. You take your kid into the bathroom, the men's room, and there's not a changing table there. Now, today, I think we see more and more changing tables in men's rooms, and that's a great thing. Every now and then you come across one that doesn't have it, and I make it a point actually to go find the manager. I say, hey, I'm not a jerk about it, but I say, hey, it'd be really great if you could have a changing table in the men's room, because it shouldn't always have to be my wife to go do the diaper, right? And, oh, yeah, you're right. Most people don't even think about it, right? But also, if I see a changing table in a men's room somewhere, I will make a point to go find the manager and thank them for that, right? Because they certainly don't have to do that. But Squat for Change started probably 6 years ago, roughly. And maybe 6, 7 years ago. Point is, Dante was out with his family, and he had to go change his son. He found when the men's room didn't see a changing table, so he literally squatted down, leaned against the wall, squatted down, put his son over his lap, and changed his diaper that way. And so that's Squat for Change. And he wanted to change this issue with changing tables in men's rooms. And so he worked with, I think it was Pampers.
Okay.
Huggies. I'm sorry if it was Huggies, but I think it was Pampers. He worked with them to donate money and to fund this and to get more changing tables in men's rooms. And so, yeah, it's a very niche thing.
I love it.
But it's this mindset change of like, we can and we should do that. And we want to do it.
I've had my own stories of like getting into the restaurant. I remember one time, I remember going to the restaurant, really nice restaurant. We loved going there, and we would go there before we had our first child. And it wasn't until, we spent some time, a couple of months, we want to take the baby out again. Oh, babe, like, let's go to our favorite restaurant down on Virginia Beach. I'm not going to call the name of the restaurant out or anything like that. Mm. And we took our son, and finally I was like, okay, I'm going to go change the diaper. And my wife, she's sipping on her margarita. It's like our first one since we having a baby and all that. And I go in the bathroom, and there's no changing table. And I remember I started to freak out a little bit because I already knew he did number 2. So it was timely. I was like, I don't know what to do. And I got really upset. And I didn't know if I was going to yell at somebody. I didn't know if I should go back in and talk to my wife. I didn't want to switch and like, here, babe, like this is your burden or whatever again now. I remember just putting the baby in the sink. Luckily, there was a little bit flatter sink because it was supposed to be a really nice restaurant or whatever. But I was pissed. And I remember one time the baby started peeing. I was just like, just let it funnel rainbow right into the other sink. Like, I don't care. At this point, right, needs to know I'm upset because things need to change. So I am happier when I do see changing tables in the men's room. But I can even say like 2 weeks ago, I was at a restaurant and there wasn't one. So we still got a long way to go. But it's wild.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do want the people to know. First, let me just stop. Thank you. This has been such an amazing conversation. Like, this has been so progressive. it answered a lot of questions that I didn't even know I had. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who are going to listen to this podcast for time and time again. And I hope, if anything, there's a father at one point who's going to listen to this podcast like, man, I'm glad that changed. You know what I mean? That's what I'm hoping for. So let the people know how they can find you, if there's ways that they can find you, or how they can find the organization and how they can be part of the change.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you. Email is the best way to reach me. I will be candid. I used to be on Twitter, or X now. I turned into a dumpster fire. Personally, it got to be, it was very helpful in many ways, but the negatives outweighed the positives after a while. So I got off that. If you go to NPO's website, National Parents Organization's website, which is Shared Parenting, all one word, sharedparenting.org. You can email them directly there and ask for my contact info, and they'll put you in touch with me. Or if you're still listening by this point, hopefully you are, it is Christian Posh at sharedparenting.org. So it's all Christian, just like the religion, and then Posh, which is PAASCH, again, all one word, at sharedparenting.org. And I'll be happy to connect with you and see where we can go from there.
Awesome. Guys, thank you for staying here through the entire episode. If you have any questions or there are any discussion topics that we missed, please leave it in the comments below. Till next time. Thank you for watching. You just listened to Here for the Dads podcast with Meyer Crawl. I am so grateful that you're here. But if you're new to this space, what I need you to do is slow down and subscribe, share, review, or rate. Whatever you can to help me out, because I'm on a journey to create a space for existing fathers and new fathers that's going to allow them to be a little bit more confident and a little bit more efficient at what they're doing. Thank you.